Without a place to live, elderly couple find a secret bunker, and what was inside changes everything. Dorothy Mitchell tightened her grip on the strap of the brown leather purse as she watched the moving truck drive away for the last time. 50 years of marriage, a lifetime of memories, now reduced to 2 old suitcases that she and her husband Harold carried along the deserted streets of the Hope District. The foreclosure had been swift and merciless. It all started when their grandson Ryan needed emergency heart surgery at 17. The health insurance denied coverage, citing a pre-existing condition that hadn't been declared. Dorothy and Harold didn't hesitate to mortgage the house they'd owned since 1974 to pay for the medical procedures that cost over $200,000. "Dorothy, my feet are hurting," murmured Harold, stopping under a streetlight that flickered irregularly. She looked at the man she had loved for more than half a century. His hair white as cotton, his shoulders stooped from the weight of years and worries, his trembling hands that had once been strong enough to build the kitchen table where they'd had coffee for decades. At 72, Harold was no longer the same man she'd met at the church summer festival in 1971. "Let's find a place to rest," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The problem wasn't just losing the house. 2 months ago, an error in the Social Security Administration system had blocked Harold's pension. The employees kept repeating the same vague explanation about data inconsistencies, promising to resolve it soon. But soon had turned into an eternity for those with nowhere to live. Dorothy had flatly refused her children's offers to stay with them. Robert lived in Chicago with his family and was already facing his own financial difficulties. Linda lived in a small apartment with her 2 teenage children. The last thing Dorothy wanted was to be a burden to her own children. "Stubborn pride," Linda had said during their last phone call. "Mom, you're not a burden to anyone." But Dorothy knew the reality. She knew how expenses would increase, how the family's routine would change, how awkward it would be to depend on those she had raised to be independent. She preferred to find a solution on her own, even if temporary, until the pension was released. They walked for another 20 minutes until they reached the outskirts of the district, where the houses became more sparse and the streets less lit. The uneven terrain forced Harold to stop frequently, and Dorothy felt a pang in her chest each time she saw him struggling. That's when she stumbled. The root of an old tree had created a bump in the dirt ground, and Dorothy lost her balance while carrying the heavy suitcase. As she tried to steady herself, her hand found something cold and metallic, hidden among the vegetation. "Harold, come see this," she called, carefully brushing away the dry leaves. It was a door, a military green painted metal door, but with the paint peeling in several spots. It was partially buried and covered by decades of plant growth, as if nature had tried to hide it from the world. "That's strange," commented Harold, kneeling with difficulty beside his wife. "A door in the middle of the woods." Dorothy ran her fingers over the rough surface. There was an old lock, but it was rusty and seemed not to have been used in a long time. Above the door, almost invisible under the vegetation, she could make out some hand-painted numbers, 1962. "It looks like it's from a basement or something," she said. "Harold, what if—" "Dorothy, we can't trespass on someone else's property." "Whose property?" "Look around. There's no house nearby, no fence, nothing. This has been abandoned for years." Harold looked around. Indeed, they were on a vacant lot that seemed to belong to no one. The nearest houses were at least 200 meters away, separated by dense vegetation and uneven terrain. "What if it's dangerous?" he asked. "What if it's our salvation?" replied Dorothy, with a determination she hadn't felt in months. She pulled the door hard, but it was stuck. Harold, despite his physical limitations, helped by pushing with his shoulder. After several minutes of joint effort, the door gave way with a metallic creak that echoed through the silent night. A concrete staircase descended into total darkness. Dorothy took out her cell phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed solid, apparently well-maintained steps, descending about 3 meters to a second door, this one made of wood. "Dorothy, this isn't a good idea," insisted Harold. "Do we have another option? Should we sleep on the street?" She was already stepping down onto the first step. "Stay up there if you want. I'm going to see what's down there." Harold sighed and followed her, carrying both suitcases with visible effort. The wooden door wasn't locked. When Dorothy opened it, she was met by a smell of mold mixed with something she couldn't identify. It wasn't unpleasant, just old. The cell phone light revealed a space that left them speechless. It was a bunker, a fully furnished underground shelter, as if someone had left not long ago and forgotten to turn off the lights. But there were no lights on. Dorothy felt along the wall for a switch and, to her surprise, found one. When she flipped it, fluorescent lights on the ceiling came on, illuminating the entire space. "How is this possible?" murmured Harold. The bunker was approximately 40 square meters, divided into 3 areas. The main room contained a solid wood table, 2 brown leather armchairs, a small sofa, and a bookshelf filled with books. To the right, a compact but complete kitchen with a refrigerator, stove, and cabinets. To the left, a bedroom with a double bed and a wooden wardrobe. Everything was clean, incredibly clean for a place that seemed abandoned. Dorothy walked slowly through the room, touching the furniture carefully, as if afraid it might disappear at any moment. On the main table, a few photographs were scattered. She approached to examine them more closely. They were black and white photos, clearly old. One showed a young man in a suit next to a pregnant woman in a simple dress. Another showed the same family, now with 2 small children posing in front of a house. There were more photos, always of the same family, but from different times. "Harold, come look at this," she called. He approached, still breathless from the effort of carrying the suitcases down the stairs. When he saw the photographs, his face took on a strange expression. "Do you know these people?" asked Dorothy. "No, not exactly, but there's something familiar about them." Dorothy picked up one of the photographs and examined it more closely. The woman in the photo had dark hair tied in a simple bun, large, expressive eyes, and a shy smile. There was something about her face that bothered her, a feeling of having seen those features somewhere before. "Let's explore the rest," she said, putting the photo back on the table. The kitchen was fully equipped, and surprisingly, the refrigerator was running. Inside, they found canned goods, some homemade preserves, and water. The cabinets contained more non-perishable foods, dishes, cutlery, and kitchen utensils. "It's as if someone prepared this place for us," commented Harold, opening a can of peaches in syrup. In the bedroom, the bed linens were clean and smelled of fabric softener. Dorothy opened the wardrobe and found a few articles of clothing, all in sizes that seemed like they would fit her and Harold. Simple dresses from the 60s, some men's shirts, a wool coat. "This is getting really weird," she said. "Weird, but providential," replied Harold, sitting on the bed to test the firmness of the mattress. "Dorothy, I don't know how this is possible, but we need a place to stay, at least for tonight." She knew he was right. It was past 11 at night. They were exhausted and had no realistic alternatives. Even if it was just for one night, that bunker offered shelter, food, and a minimum of dignity that the street could not provide. "All right," she agreed. "But tomorrow we'll try to find out who this place belongs to." They organized their few things in the room and prepared a simple dinner with the food found in the kitchen. The water was running, as was the electricity. It was inexplicable, but it worked. During dinner, Dorothy couldn't take her eyes off the photographs on the table. The more she looked, the stronger the feeling of familiarity with that family became, especially with the woman. There was something in her eyes that deeply disturbed her. "Harold," she finally said, "do you remember my childhood?" He stopped chewing and looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" "My childhood, my parents, the house where I grew up. Do you remember the stories I used to tell?" Harold was silent for a long moment, moving his fork around the plate without eating. "Why are you asking this now?" "Just answer. Do you remember?" "Dorothy, we met when you were already 22. You were always reserved about your childhood. You said there were things you preferred to forget." She felt a shiver run down her spine. It was true. She always avoided talking about her early years, but she had never questioned why. She always assumed it was because there was nothing interesting to tell. "And you never thought it was strange?" "At first, yes, but then I understood that everyone deals with the past in their own way. I thought maybe your family had problems or that you had gone through some hardship you preferred not to remember." Dorothy looked again at the photograph of the pregnant woman. There was something in the way she held her belly, the position of her hands, that gave her such a strong feeling of déjà vu. It was almost physical. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out, now continuing. After dinner, they explored the bunker in more detail. Dorothy discovered a small library on the wall of the living room, with books from different eras. There were novels from the 50s and 60s, some technical manuals, and several handwritten notebooks. One of the notebooks caught her attention. The cover was worn, but it was still possible to read Mary Dorothy, 1962, written in delicate cursive. Her name was Dorothy. With trembling hands, she opened the notebook. The first page contained a dedication. "To my dear daughter, whom I hope will one day be able to read these words and understand our choices." "Harold," she called, her voice choked. He approached and read over her shoulder. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "It could be a coincidence," he said, but without much conviction. Dorothy turned the pages. The notebook was a diary, written by someone named Mary Dorothy Mitchell. The first entries dated from January 1962. "Today, we decided to build the shelter. George says it's an exaggeration, but I feel we need a safe place for our family. The times are difficult, and with 2 small children, I can't take risks. The shelter is almost ready. George worked day and night to finish it before winter. The children think it's a game, but I know it could be our salvation. We had to move to the shelter temporarily. The problems on the surface have become more complicated than we imagined. I hope it's only for a few weeks." Dorothy continued reading, each page increasing her confusion and anxiety. The woman in the diary described a life of hardships, a hard-working but worried husband, 2 children who needed to be protected from some threat that was never explicitly described. But it was the small details that disturbed her. Mary Dorothy Mitchell described liking the same foods that Dorothy had always preferred. She mentioned being afraid of storms, exactly like Dorothy. She talked about a scar on her right knee that she got in childhood from falling out of a tree. Dorothy looked at her own right knee. There was a small scar there, almost imperceptible after so many years, but which she had always known came from a childhood fall. "Harold, this can't be a coincidence." "Can't be." He took the notebook from her hands and read a few pages in silence. "Dorothy, you're scaring yourself for no reason. Many people have similar scars, similar tastes, and the name Dorothy isn't that unusual." But even as he spoke, Harold didn't seem to completely believe his own words. Dorothy stood up and walked to the bookshelf. Among them, she found more notebooks and some folders with documents. In a folder marked Family, there were birth certificates, marriage documents, and other paperwork. When she opened the first birth certificate, her legs weakened. She had to lean on the table to keep from falling. The document was for a child named Dorothy Mitchell, born on March 15, 1951. The same birth date that was on her own documents, but with a different last name. Her official document said, Dorothy Smith, daughter of John Smith and Carol Smith. "Harold," she said, her voice almost inaudible. "Harold, come here." He approached and looked at the document she held with trembling hands. It must be another person with the same birth date. It happens. With the same name? In the same city? With the exact same date? Harold didn't answer. He took the certificate and examined it more carefully. The document seemed genuine, with the appropriate stamps and signatures for the time. Dorothy kept going through the papers. She found photos of 2 children playing in the bunker, a girl and a boy. The girl had light hair and big eyes just like she had in childhood. The boy was a little older, with dark hair and a mischievous smile. On one of the photographs there was a note on the back. Dorothy and Walter, 1955. "I have a brother," said Dorothy, more to herself than to Harold. "Dorothy, you're letting your imagination run away with you. They're just coincidences." But she was no longer listening. She kept searching through the documents until she found a yellowed letter, dated 1958. "My dear Dorothy, if you are reading this, it means you managed to return home. I know you were very young when they had to separate us, and perhaps you don't remember me, but I am your mother. My name is Mary Dorothy Mitchell, and you are my dearest daughter. The circumstances forced us to make difficult decisions. You and your brother Walter were taken to different families, and they told us it would be better this way, that you would have a better chance at a happy life. But not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you. This shelter was built for our family. Your father and I prepared this place with love, hoping that one day we could be reunited here. Even if that is not possible, I hope you find peace in these pages and understand that we never stopped loving you. Look for your brother Walter. He was with a family in Chicago when he was taken in 1958. Perhaps he is also looking for you. With all my love, your mother, Mary Dorothy. Dorothy let the letter fall to the floor. Her legs gave way and she sat down heavily in the nearest armchair. Harold picked up the letter and read it in silence, his face progressively paling. "This can't be true," he murmured. "Why not?" asked Dorothy with tears in her eyes. "Why can't it be true that I had a family before the Smiths? Why can't it be true that I have a brother somewhere? Because you would remember. I remember being 6 and suddenly being with a new family. I always thought it was because my parents had passed away. David and Carol Smith were always very vague about how they adopted me. They only said that I needed a family, and they took me in." Harold sat in the armchair beside her. "Dorothy, even if this is true, it was over 60 years ago. The people involved may no longer be alive. This letter is from 1958. But they could be. Walter could be alive. He would be 2 years older than me. He'd be about 74 today. It's possible." They fell silent for a long time, absorbing the implications of that discovery. If it were true, it meant Dorothy had lived almost her entire life without knowing her true origin. It meant she had a brother somewhere, perhaps looking for her the same way she didn't even know she should be looking for him. "What do we do now?" asked Harold. "I don't know. I need to think. I need to remember." Dorothy closed her eyes and tried to force her memory back to her early years. There were scattered fragments: a house that smelled of wood, a woman singing softly, a boy teaching her how to tie her shoes. But they had always been hazy memories she assumed were childhood fantasies. "Maybe we should sleep," suggested Harold. "Tomorrow we can think more clearly." She agreed, but knew she wouldn't be able to sleep. Her mind was racing with possibilities, fragmented memories, and an overwhelming feeling that her entire life had been built on incomplete information. In the bedroom, as they prepared for bed, Dorothy kept thinking about the letter from her mother. If Mary Dorothy Mitchell had built that bunker hoping her children would return, what had happened to her? Why was the place preserved but empty? "Harold," she said in the darkness, "do you think it was a coincidence that we found this place?" "I don't know, Dorothy. Perhaps some encounters are bigger than coincidences." The next morning, Dorothy woke up earlier than her husband. She had slept poorly, dreaming of memory fragments she didn't know were real or created by her anxious imagination. In the dream, there was a woman in a blue apron teaching her how to make bread, and a boy with dark hair who laughed when she tried to reach the books on the high shelf. She got up quietly and went to the main room. In the daylight, coming through the small skylight in the ceiling, the bunker seemed even more real and welcoming. She went back to examining the photographs on the table, this time paying more attention to the details. In one of the photos, the family was sitting at the table having a meal. The arrangement of the furniture was exactly the same as now. The table, the armchairs, even the bookshelf were in the same positions. It was as if time had stopped in that place. Dorothy decided to look for more clues. She opened all the drawers of the table and found more letters, some addressed to her specifically. There were also letters for Walter and a folder with what looked like the family's contingency plans. One of the letters for her was marked, "Open when you turn 60." Dorothy had turned 72 in March. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. "My dear Dorothy, if you are reading this at 60, it means you have managed to live a long and, I hope, happy life. Perhaps you have children. Perhaps you have found love. Perhaps you have realized dreams I couldn't even imagine for you. I want you to know that the decision to let you go was the most difficult one of my life. In 1958, the authorities told us we weren't capable of properly caring for 2 children in our financial situation. They promised you would be placed with loving families who could give you opportunities we couldn't offer. Your father, George, never forgave himself for not fighting harder. He spent his last years searching for you and Walter, but the system back then didn't make reunions easy. When he passed in 1976, his last word was your name. This bunker was our attempt to create a place where our family could reunite if circumstances allowed. I prepared this space with love, organized documents and memories, hoping that one day you could learn your true origins. If you are here, it's because fate wanted you to find your way home. There is an address in Chicago where Walter was in 1958. I don't know if it's still valid, but it could be a start to finding him. It's in the secret drawer of the desk. Press the bottom right corner. With eternal love, your mother, Mary Dorothy Mitchell. Dorothy looked for the secret drawer mentioned in the letter. When she pressed the bottom right corner of the desk, a small drawer opened, revealing more documents and an address in Chicago. Michigan Avenue, 247, Henderson family. She wrote down the address on a piece of paper and returned to the room, where Harold was starting to wake up. I found more things, she said, showing him the letter and the address. Harold read everything in silence, his expression growing more serious with each line. Dorothy, this changes everything. How so? If this story is true, you have family. Blood family who might be alive. We don't need to stay here depending on anyone's charity. Dorothy hadn't thought of it from that angle. She was so focused on the discovery about her origins that she hadn't considered the practical implications. If she found Walter, perhaps he could help them. Maybe she wouldn't need to feel like a burden to her own children. But what if he doesn't want to meet us? What if he built his own life and doesn't want contact with the past? What if he's also been searching for you for 60 years? They ate breakfast using the supplies found in the bunker. Dorothy made bread using ingredients from the pantry, and surprisingly, her hands seemed to remember the recipe without her needing to consciously think of the steps. It was as if her body held memories her mind had forgotten. We need to go to Chicago, she finally said. How? We don't have money for bus tickets. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can borrow help from Robert or Linda. I thought you didn't want to bother the kids. This is different. It's not asking for help out of need. It's asking for help to solve a family mystery. They'll understand. Harold agreed, but Dorothy noticed he was weaker than the day before. The walk the previous night had been exhausting for a 72-year-old man with heart problems. Before anything, you need to rest a few days, she said. Dorothy, we don't have time to waste. If Walter exists, he is also elderly. Every day that passes is one day less. She knew he was right, but she also knew pushing Harold beyond his physical limits could be dangerous. At that moment, they heard footsteps outside the bunker. Someone was walking on the ground above them. Dorothy and Harold exchanged worried glances. They still didn't know if they were trespassing, and the possibility of being discovered frightened them. The footsteps stopped directly above the entrance. Then they heard a woman's voice calling, "Hello? Is anyone down there?" Dorothy slowly climbed the ladder and opened the top door. Outside stood a woman of about 60, with graying hair tied in a ponytail, wearing simple clothes and holding a shopping bag. "Sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but I saw movement around here last night and got curious. My name is Margaret. I live in the yellow house down there." Dorothy didn't know how to respond. The woman seemed friendly, but that didn't mean she wouldn't call the authorities. "I'm Dorothy. We're going through a temporary difficulty." Margaret came down a few steps to look inside the bunker. "Wow, I didn't know it was still in good shape. No one's touched this place for years." "You know this place?" "Of course. I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. When we moved in, the neighbors told stories about the family that lived down here in the 60s. Times were hard, and many people had to improvise housing." Dorothy felt her heart race. Finally, someone who might have real information about her family. "Do you remember the names of the people who lived here?" "Let me see. It was a couple with 2 children, George and Mary Dorothy, if I'm not mistaken. After a few years, they disappeared. Some neighbors said the family split up, that the children went to other families." "And what happened to George and Mary Dorothy?" Margaret grew thoughtful for a moment. "Well, I'm not sure because I was young at the time, But I heard that George tried to get his children back for years. He would come here from time to time, keeping this place tidy, hoping they would return. Mary Dorothy. Poor thing. I don't think she could bear the separation. I heard she got sick and passed away a few years later. Dorothy felt a pang in her chest. Her birth mother had died waiting for her. And the children? They never came back? I never saw them, but George kept this place running until his final years. He paid the water and electricity bills religiously, left everything prepared. He said you never knew when the children might need a home. Tears began to stream down Dorothy's face. Her birth father had spent decades preparing that place for his children's return, even knowing it might never happen. "When did George pass away?" asked Harold, who had come up to join the conversation. "About 15 years ago, more or less. He was in his mid-80s. Until the end, he would come here at least once a month to clean and organize. And after he died. The place was officially abandoned, but the electricity bill kept getting paid automatically. I think he left some money set aside for that. It's only in the last few years that the vegetation started taking over the entrance." Dorothy understood it was no coincidence she had found the bunker in perfect condition. It was the result of decades of a father's love, from a man who never gave up hope of finding his children again. "Margaret," she said, "I'm Dorothy. Dorothy Mitchell." The woman's eyes widened. You're their daughter?" "I think so. I'm still trying to understand everything." "Good heavens. George always said you'd come back. He always said it." Margaret hugged Dorothy spontaneously as if she were an old friend. It was the first time in months Dorothy felt truly welcomed by someone. "And Walter?" asked Dorothy. "The boy, my brother. Do you have any news of him?" "Not directly, but a few years ago, a man came here looking for information about this property. He said he was searching for the Mitchell family. He was in his mid-50s at the time, with dark hair. Looked a lot like George when he was younger." Dorothy held on to Harold's arm for support. The possibility that Walter was alive and looking for her was overwhelming. "Did you speak with him?" "Yes, I did. I told him the same story I told you. He wrote everything down and said he would keep looking. She left a phone number with me, asking me to call if I learned anything." "Do you still have that number?" "Yes, I do. It's kept at home. I'll go get it." Margaret left, almost running toward her house. Dorothy and Harold remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what they were discovering. "Dorothy," Harold finally said, "I think we found more than a shelter. We found your family." She couldn't speak. Decades of questions about her origins were finally finding answers. But along with the answers came a deep pain from understanding how much time she had lost, how much love had been wasted by not knowing these people existed. Margaret returned 10 minutes later with a yellowed piece of paper. "Here it is. Walter Henderson, that's the name he gave me. He lives in Chicago." Dorothy took the paper with trembling hands. Walter Henderson, the same last name that was on the address found in the bunker, the Henderson family. "Margaret, how many years ago was this?" "About 5 years, more or less. But he said he had been searching for a long time." Dorothy looked at Harold. 5 years ago, she was still living her normal life, never imagining she had a brother looking for her. Walter had found clues that led him to this place, but she wasn't here to be found. Now she was here, but he might have given up. "I'm going to call him," Dorothy decided. "Are you sure?" "Harold, I spent 72 years not knowing I have a brother. I can't spend another day without trying to make contact." Margaret offered her home phone for Dorothy to make the call. It was a Chicago cell phone number. Dorothy dialed with trembling fingers, her heart beating so loudly she was sure everyone around could hear it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, someone answered. "Hello?" It was a mature, male voice with a soft Chicago accent. "Is this Walter Henderson?" "Yes, speaking. Who is this?" Dorothy took a deep breath. "Walter, my name is Dorothy Mitchell. I think I'm your sister." The silence on the other end lasted so long, Dorothy thought the call had dropped. Finally, she heard an uneven breath and a choked voice. "Dorothy? My sister Dorothy." "I think so. I'm here at the bunker, at the shelter our parents built." "You're where?" Walter's voice grew sharper, laden with emotion. In the bunker, in Hope District, where our family lived. My God in heaven, Dorothy, I've been looking for you for over 20 years. Tears streamed down Dorothy's face uncontrollably. Walter, I didn't even know you existed. I found out yesterday. We found this place by chance and... Not by chance. Daddy always said if any of us ever needed a home, our heart would guide us to the right place. Dorothy couldn't stop crying. On the other end of the line, Walter also seemed emotional. Dorothy, I'm coming there, now. I'm leaving Chicago already. Walter, it's far. It's almost a 2-hour trip. Little sister, I've waited 67 years to find you. 2 hours is nothing. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. After the call, Dorothy returned to the bunker in a state of emotional shock. Harold helped her sit down and prepared a calming tea with the supplies they found in the pantry. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know. It's as if my whole life was an incomplete story, and now the missing pages are all appearing at once. Dorothy spent the following hours rereading the letters and examining the photographs with a completely new perspective. Now that she knew that was her family, every detail took on profound meaning. In one of Mary Dorothy's letters to her, her biological mother described Dorothy's personality as a child. You were always determined, my daughter. When you wanted something, you wouldn't give up until you got it. And you always took care of Walter as if you were the older sister, even though you were 2 years younger. Dorothy smiled through her tears. She had maintained that characteristic her entire life, the determination not to accept help from her children, the need to solve problems on her own. It was as if her personality were a bridge between the past she had forgotten and the present she had built. At 3 in the afternoon, Margaret appeared at the entrance to the bunker. Dorothy, there's a car stopped up there. A man is getting out. Dorothy's heart raced. She quickly climbed the stairs, followed by Harold. Outside, a man of approximately 74 years old was walking toward the bunker entrance. He was tall with completely white hair, wearing a light blue shirt and dress pants. When he saw Dorothy, he stopped halfway. They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. It was undeniable. The eyes were the same as in the old photograph. The shape of the face, the way of tilting his head when thoughtful. Even with over 60 years of difference, Dorothy recognized features that were stored somewhere deep in her memory. Dorothy, he asked, his voice choked. Walter? They ran to each other and embraced in the middle of the vacant lot, crying like two lost children who had finally found their way home. Little sister, murmured Walter, holding her tightly. My little sister. Dorothy felt as if a void she didn't even know existed was finally being filled. It was a sense of completeness she had never experienced. When they separated, Walter held her face in his hands and studied her intently. You look like Mom. The same eyes, the same way of furrowing your brow when you're thinking. And you look like Dad. Margaret told me that. Harold approached discreetly, and Dorothy introduced him to her brother. Walter, this is Harold, my husband of 50 years. Walter shook Harold's hand warmly. Thank you for taking care of my sister all these years. Thank you for finding her now, replied Harold. The three went down into the bunker, and Walter was visibly moved upon seeing the space. It's exactly as I remembered, he said, walking slowly through the room. Dad kept everything the same. Do you remember living here? Perfectly. I was 8 when we left. Dorothy, you were 6. We used to play hide-and-seek between these armchairs. You always hid behind the bookcase. Dorothy closed her eyes and tried to access those memories. For a moment, she managed to glimpse a fragmented image, herself, small, crouched behind the bookcase, trying not to laugh while someone searched for her. I remember, she said, surprised. Vaguely, but I remember. Walter led her to the bookcase and pointed to a small mark in the wood near the floor. You made this mark with a pencil when you were 5. You said you were measuring how much you had grown. Dorothy knelt and touched the mark with her fingers. The memory came like a flash, herself, very small, proudly marking her height on the wood, while a dark-haired boy watched her smiling. "Walter," she said, standing up, "I remember you teaching me to tie my shoes. Right there in the kitchen. You cried because you couldn't do it, and I sat on the floor with you until you could." The memories began to flow more easily. Fragments of a childhood that had been blocked were returning gradually, as if Walter's presence were the key that unlocked her mind. "What happened to us?" asked Dorothy. "Why were we separated?" Walter sat down heavily in one of the armchairs. "It's a long and painful story. Are you sure you want to know everything?" "I need to know." He took a deep breath before beginning. "Our parents went through serious financial difficulties in 1957. Dad lost his job and we had to sell the house. We built this bunker as temporary housing while Dad looked for work, but some neighbors thought it was inappropriate for children to live in an underground shelter." Dorothy sat in the armchair next to him, preparing to hear truths that could be painful. "The authorities at the time came here several times. They said our parents weren't fit to raise us properly. Mom and Dad tried to argue, showed them we had food, education, medical care, but the unconventional housing was considered unsuitable for children." "Did they take us by force?" "Not exactly. It was more subtle and cruel than that. They told our parents that if they didn't voluntarily agree to place us in temporary foster care, they would be prosecuted for neglect. They promised it would only be until Dad got a stable job and a proper house." Dorothy felt a mix of anger and sadness growing in her chest. And our parents believed them? They had no choice. It was that or risk losing us permanently through a court process, so they agreed, hoping it would be temporary. But it wasn't. It wasn't. I went to the Henderson family in Chicago. You went to the Smiths right here, but in a distant neighborhood. Our parents told us they could visit us, that it would only be for a few months. Walter stopped talking for a moment, clearly struggling with emotion. "They never let us see our parents again. The foster families were instructed to cut contact with the biological family to facilitate our adaptation. And we were very young. With time, we began to forget. But you remembered more than I did. I was older, and also, I think I resisted adapting more. The Henderson family was good to me, but I always knew they weren't my real family. You were younger. Perhaps it was easier for you to adapt and forget." Dorothy understood that what she had always interpreted as a positive ability to adapt had actually been an unconscious survival strategy of a traumatized child. "And our parents? When did you find out what happened to them?" "I started looking for you when I turned 18 in 1966, but back then there were no centralized adoption records, and foster families had a legal right to secrecy. It took me years to discover you were here in the same city." "Did you look for me back then?" "I did. But when I found the Smiths, they told me you were happy, that you had adapted well, that you had a stable life. They said digging up the past could be harmful to you." Dorothy felt a pang of anger toward her adoptive parents. They had the right to protect her, but they had also denied her the right to know her true origins. "And you accepted that?" "I was young, insecure. I thought maybe they were right. I thought maybe that it would be selfish of me to disrupt your life just to satisfy my need to have a sister back. Walter, you weren't selfish. It was your right to look for me. I realized that years later. When I came back, you had gotten married and changed your name. The trail became harder to follow." Harold, who had remained silent listening to the story, finally spoke. "Dorothy always had nightmares when she was young, dreams about an underground house and a boy calling her. I never understood what they meant." Dorothy remembered the nightmares. They were recurrent in the first years of marriage, always with the same image. Her as a little girl, crying, reaching her arms out to someone who was walking away. She always woke up distressed, not understanding why. "They were memories," said Walter. "You were remembering when they separated us. And our parents? Did you ever find them again?" Walter's face grew deeply saddened. "Dad, yes. Mom couldn't bear the separation." "Mom couldn't. She developed a deep depression and died in 1965. Dad told me she never stopped waiting for you to come home." Dorothy began to cry again. Her biological mother had spent the last years of her life waiting for children who didn't even know she was waiting. "Dad lived until 1998. I spent the last 20 years of his life coming here with him, keeping this place running, hoping that one day you would show up. Even after he died, I kept coming. At least once a year." That's why the place was so well kept. Exactly. And 5 years ago when I spoke with Margaret, she told me she had never seen anyone around here. I thought you might have died, or that you didn't want to be found. Dorothy stood up and hugged Walter again. I'm sorry it took me so long to come home. Little sister, what matters is that you're here. They spent the rest of the afternoon sharing stories of their separate lives. Walter talked about his career as a civil engineer, about the wife he had lost 3 years ago, about his 2 grown children who lived in Chicago. Dorothy talked about Harold, about Robert and Linda, about the simple but happy life they had built. Dorothy, Walter said at one point, you need to know something. Our parents left an inheritance. What do you mean? Dad worked very hard after we left. He said he wanted to make sure that if you came back, you'd have the means to rebuild your life. There's a bank account in your name with a considerable amount. Dorothy was shocked. How much? Enough for you to buy a house. Dad insisted it be that way. He said if he couldn't give his children a home while he was alive, he would at least make sure you had a home when you returned. Harold held Dorothy's hand. That means we don't have to worry about housing anymore. It's not just that, Walter continued. There are some properties too. Dad bought a few small plots of land over the years. He said they were for the children and grandchildren he hoped to meet someday. Dorothy was having trouble processing the information. In 2 days, she had gone from homeless to the heir of a small fortune left by parents she barely remembered. Walter, I don't know if I can accept this. Dorothy, it's yours by right. Our dad worked his whole life for this. It would be an insult to his memory to refuse. But you took care of him all these years. You kept this place running. It should be yours. I already received my share. And more importantly, I got 20 years with our father. You didn't have that opportunity. This inheritance is his way of making up for the lost time. That night, Walter called his children in Chicago to tell them about the reunion with their aunt. Dorothy spoke with them on the phone, moved to discover she had nephews she never knew existed. Aunt Dorothy, said Sarah, Walter's youngest daughter, my dad has talked about you since I was little. He always said we would meet one day. And now we will, replied Dorothy, smiling through her tears. The 3 of them slept in the bunker that night. Walter had brought a sleeping bag from his car, insisting on staying to prolong the reunion. It was one of the most special nights of Dorothy's life, sleeping in the same space where she had spent her early childhood years, beside the brother who had searched for her for decades. The next morning, Walter took Dorothy and Harold to a bank in town to handle the transfer of the inheritance. The manager confirmed there was an account in the name of Dorothy Mitchell, with specific instructions left by George Mitchell years ago. He came here every year to update his information and make sure everything was in order for when you showed up, explained the manager. The amount was even larger than Walter had mentioned. George had been not only loving, but also extremely prudent with finances. There was enough money for Dorothy and Harold to buy a comfortable house and live decently with the pension supplement. Harold, said Dorothy when they left the bank, our life is going to change completely. For the better, we'll finally have stability. But Dorothy was thinking of something deeper than financial stability. She was thinking of the sense of belonging she had felt upon finding Walter, the completeness that came from finally knowing her true origins. Walter suggested they spend a few days in Chicago to get to know his family better. Dorothy and Harold accepted the proposal, eager to expand the family circle that had become so important. The trip to Chicago was a revelation for Dorothy. Walter's house was filled with photographs of the Mitchell family, including many she hadn't seen in the bunker. Sarah and David, Walter's children, welcomed Dorothy and Harold as if they had been close family for years. My father always talked so much about his aunt that we felt like we already knew her, explained David. During dinner on the first night, Walter showed a photo album he had compiled over the years with all the images and documents he had managed to gather about the family. Dorothy, there's something I need to show you, he said, opening a specific page of the album. It was a photograph of Dorothy as a young child, which she didn't remember ever seeing. In the picture, she was smiling, holding Walter's hand in front of the bunker. Where did you get this photo? Our father kept it. He said it was his favorite picture of the 2 of us. Look on the back. Dorothy turned the photograph over. In George's characteristic handwriting it said, "Dorothy and Walter, 1957. My happy children at home." She couldn't hold back the tears. It was tangible proof that she had been loved, that her early years had been happy before the traumatic separation. "Walter, may I keep this photo?" "It's yours. In fact, there are several of your things that Dad kept." He took Dorothy to a room he had maintained as a sort of Mitchell family museum. There were her toys, some drawings she had made as a child, even a small dress her biological mother had sewn for her. "He kept everything," murmured Dorothy, touching the relics of her childhood. "He never lost hope that you would return." That night, Dorothy called Robert and Linda to tell them about the discoveries. Both were shocked, but also happy that she had found answers to questions they never knew she carried. "Mom," said Linda, "this explains so much. You always had a sadness in your eyes that we never understood. It was a sadness I didn't even know existed." The 5 days in Chicago passed quickly. Dorothy and Walter recovered decades of lost conversations, sharing memories, dreams, and perspectives on life. Harold adapted well to the expanded family, finding in Walter a friend as well as a brother-in-law. On the last day, they visited the cemetery where George and Mary Dorothy were buried. Dorothy brought flowers and stood for a long time in silence before the graves of her biological parents. "Thank you for never giving up on me," she whispered to the headstones. Walter put his arm around her shoulders. "They know you've come home." When they returned to their hometown, Dorothy and Harold decided what to do with their new financial situation. They bought a small but comfortable house 2 blocks from the bunker, wanting to remain close to the place where they had discovered their true origins. The bunker was transformed into a family memory space. Dorothy and Walter would meet there regularly to organize old documents and share memories. Margaret became a constant presence, helping with the maintenance of the place and contributing her own memories about the Mitchell family. 3 months after the reunion, Dorothy was organizing some boxes of documents when she found a letter she hadn't read yet. It was addressed, "To Dorothy when you find Walter." It was from her biological mother, and it was dated just a few weeks before her death in 1965. "My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means you managed to find Walter and discover your true origins. I know it can be confusing and painful to discover that your life had different beginnings than you thought. I want you to know that the decision to let you and Walter go was the hardest of my life, but it was made out of love. We believed you would have better opportunities with families who could offer stability that we, at that time, could not guarantee. I hope you have been happy. I hope you have found love, that you have built a family, that you have realized dreams. More than anything, I hope you do not carry resentment for our choices. If you have children, hug them for me. If you have found a partner, thank them for taking care of my most precious treasure. And if you ever wonder if you were loved, know that every day of my life was filled with the love I felt for you and Walter. This bunker has always been your home, Dorothy. No matter where life has taken you, this has always been the place where you belonged. With eternal love, your mother, Mary Dorothy Mitchell." Dorothy folded the letter carefully and put it away with the other precious correspondence. She had finally found the answers she didn't even know she was looking for, and with them, a deep peace that had been missing throughout her adult life. 6 months later, Dorothy organized a birthday party for Harold in the bunker. Present were Walter with his children, Robert and Linda with their families, Margaret, and some neighbors who had become friends. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. During the party, Dorothy watched everyone talking animatedly in the space that had once been a refuge for a family in crisis. Now it was a gathering point for multiple generations united by love and discovery. Walter approached her with 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about, little sister?" "I was thinking how strange fate is. We lost the house, we were out of money, out of options. It seemed like the end of everything, but it was actually the beginning of something bigger. Dad always said the crooked paths sometimes lead to the right destinations." He was right. Dorothy looked at Harold, who was telling stories to his grandchildren, and felt a deep gratitude. If he hadn't insisted on seeking shelter that night, if she had accepted her children's help immediately, she would never have found the bunker. She would never have discovered Walter. She would never have understood who she really was. "Walter," she said, "thank you for never stopping the search. Thank you for finally coming home." 2 years later, Dorothy and Walter decided to occasionally open the bunker to other people who were searching for lost families. They created a small local organization that helped gather historical adoption documents and connect people with their origins. The project grew naturally. Margaret became an informal researcher, using her network of contacts in the neighborhood to trace family stories. Robert, who worked in technology, created a digital database to organize the information. Linda contributed her administrative skills. In 3 years, they had helped dozens of people find lost relatives or information about their origins. The bunker became a symbol of hope for families separated by historical circumstances. Dorothy discovered she had a natural talent for calming anxious people and helping them organize fragmented information about their families. Harold contributed with his patience and skill in deciphering old documents. "It's as if our entire lives were a preparation for this work," Dorothy commented one day. "Perhaps they were," replied Walter. "Perhaps our separation and reunion gave us the necessary perspective to help others in similar situations." On the 5th anniversary of the reunion, Dorothy organized a special ceremony at the bunker. The entire extended family was present, including grandchildren born after the discovery, who grew up knowing the complete story of their origins. During the ceremony, Dorothy read an excerpt from her biological mother's last diary. "If Dorothy and Walter ever read these words, I want them to know that a family's love is not lost with physical separation. It remains alive in every caring gesture, in every moment of mutual care, in every choice made thinking of the other's well-being. The bunker is just a place, but the home we built here is in your hearts, wherever you may be." At 77, Dorothy finally fully understood the meaning of those words. The home she had searched for her entire life was not a specific address or a physical structure. It was the network of loving relationships she had built and rediscovered. The bunker, which had once been an emergency refuge for a family in crisis, had become a healing center for dozens of separated families. Dorothy and Walter had transformed their own pain into a source of hope for others. Harold, now 78, still accompanied Dorothy in all activities at the bunker. His health had improved significantly after the financial worries resolved, and he found renewed purpose helping other families. "Dorothy," he said one morning as they organized documents for a new family search, "do you regret anything?" She stopped what she was doing and reflected on the question. "I regret not searching for my origins sooner. I regret that Walter spent so many years searching alone. But I don't regret the path that brought us here. Neither do I. Harold, thank you for not letting me accept help from the children that night. If we had gone straight to Robert's or Linda's house, we would never have found this place. Sometimes stubbornness has its value." Dorothy laughed. It was true. Her stubbornness, which had always been seen as a flaw, was what led her to discover her true identity. That same day, a middle-aged woman appeared at the bunker looking for information about a brother she had lost contact with in childhood. Dorothy welcomed her with the kindness that had become characteristic of her work. "How can you be so optimistic about finding lost families?" asked the woman. Dorothy smiled and pointed to the framed photograph on the wall, showing her and Walter in childhood. "Because I know that family love never completely disappears. Sometimes it's buried, covered by years of separation and forgetting, like this bunker was covered by vegetation. But it's always there, waiting to be rediscovered." The woman began to cry, and Dorothy hugged her as she had hugged dozens of others over the years. "We will find your brother," she said with conviction. "It may take time, it may be difficult, but we will find him." And they did. 2 months later, the woman reunited with the brother she hadn't seen in 40 years, and the reunion ceremony took place in the bunker, as had become tradition. Dorothy watched the emotional embrace between the siblings and felt the same happiness she had experienced in her own reunion with Walter. Each reunited family was a victory against time, and the circumstances that tried to erase blood ties. At 80 years old, Dorothy published a book telling her story and the stories of the families she had helped reunite. The book became a local success, inspiring other similar projects in nearby cities. During the book launch, which took place in the bunker, Dorothy gave an emotional speech. "This place taught me that home isn't where you're born or where you live. Home is where you are completely known and completely loved. For 72 years I had houses, but only at 73 did I find my true home." Walter, now 82, replied, "And this home has expanded to include all who need a place where they can be known and loved completely." The bunker continued operating as a family reunion center until the final years of Dorothy's life. Even when her mobility became limited, she kept receiving people searching for their origins, offering advice and hope based on her own experience. On her 85th birthday, Dorothy was sitting in the bunker surrounded by 4 generations of family. There were her biological children, Robert and Linda, Walter's children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and dozens of people who considered themselves adoptive family for having been helped over the years. Harold, 89, was still by her side, holding her hand as he had for over 60 years. "Harold," she said softly, "do you remember when we thought losing the house was the worst thing that could happen to us? I remember how wrong we were." "We weren't wrong. Losing the house was painful, but it was also what led us to find our true family." Dorothy looked around the bunker, observing the lively conversations, the children's laughter, the affection exchanged between people of different ages and backgrounds. All of this had started with a desperate night when they stumbled upon a door hidden in the vegetation. "Walter," she called. Her brother approached, walking with the aid of a cane but still with the smile she had learned to love again after decades of separation. "Little sister, thank you for keeping this place running all these years. Thank you for never giving up on finding me. Thank you for coming home. You know what I've learned all these years?" "What?" "That family isn't just about blood or being together physically. It's about choosing every day to care for each other. It's about creating spaces where people can be vulnerable and still feel safe." Walter agreed, looking around the bunker full of people who had become family through choice and mutual care. "Dad would be proud," he said. "Mom too." That night, after everyone had left, Dorothy and Harold were alone in the bunker for the last time. She knew, without anyone having to say it, that her strength was fading and that she probably wouldn't have many more birthdays. "Harold, do you have any regrets?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "I regret not telling you about my suspicions sooner." "What suspicion?" "I always thought there was something about your childhood that didn't fit. Small details in your adoptive parents' stories, some inconsistencies in the dates. But I thought if it was important, you would tell me when you were ready." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you seemed happy, because you had built a solid identity, raised our children, built a life. I thought reopening the past might cause more pain than healing." Dorothy held his hand tighter. "You were trying to protect me, as always. And I was trying to protect our children by refusing help when we lost the house. As always." They laughed together, recognizing the pattern of mutual care that had characterized their relationship for decades. "Harold, if we could go back in time, would you change anything?" "I would change the system that separates families without real need. I would change the bureaucracy that blocks pensions for the elderly. I would change the society that makes people feel ashamed for needing help. But what about us? Our life together?" "Our life together was perfect exactly as it was. Every hardship, every joy, every discovery. It all brought us here, to this moment, to this understanding." Dorothy agreed. Even the most painful parts of her life had contributed to creating the person she had become. The traumatic childhood separation had developed in her a special capacity for empathy with other lost people. The simple life with Harold had given her a solid foundation of love and trust. The loss of the house had been the necessary catalyst to discover her true origins. 3 months after her 85th birthday, Dorothy passed away peacefully in her sleep, in her new home with Harold by her side. Her funeral was held in the bunker, and hundreds of people attended to pay tribute to the woman who had dedicated the last years of her life to reuniting separated families. Walter, despite his own frailty at 87, gave a moving speech. "My sister Dorothy taught me that it's never too late to come home. She taught me that family is something you build every day through small acts of love. And she taught me that our personal story, however painful, can become a source of healing for others." The bunker continued operating after Dorothy's departure, managed by Walter with help from Robert, Linda, and the volunteers who had dedicated themselves to the project over the years. A plaque was placed at the entrance, "Dorothy Mitchell Family Reunion Center, where all families can find their way home." Harold lived 2 more years after Dorothy's departure. He spent that time organizing all the letters and documents she had kept, creating a complete archive of the Mitchell family history and the dozens of families that had been reunited through her work. The day before his own departure, Harold wrote a final letter that was found on the bunker's table. "To all the families still searching for each other, my wife Dorothy taught me that true love always finds a way. It may take decades. It may require you to lose everything to find what truly matters. It may force you to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. But love always finds a way." This bunker was built by desperate parents who wanted to protect their family. It was abandoned when the family was separated. It was preserved by a father who never lost hope. It was rediscovered by a daughter who needed to come home. Now it is a permanent reminder that no separation is final, no loss is complete, no family is beyond the possibility of healing. If you are searching for someone, don't give up. If you are lost, keep walking. If you feel something is missing in your life, trust that one day you will stumble upon the right door at the right time with the right people to help you find your way home. With love and hope, Harold Smith. The bunker continued operating for more than a decade after the departure of Dorothy and Harold. Walter remained involved until his final year of life, passing away at 92, surrounded by his 4 generations of descendants in the same space where he had played as a child. Sarah and David, Walter's children, took over the administration of the center with the same dedication they had learned from watching Dorothy and Walter. The project expanded to include not only family reunions, but also assistance for elderly people in vulnerable housing situations. Robert and Linda remained active in the project, honoring their mother's memory through practical, everyday work. Dorothy's grandchildren, who grew up hearing the bunker's story, became the next generation of volunteers. Margaret, the neighbor who had found Dorothy and Harold on that first morning, lived to 95, remaining as the living memory of the neighborhood and the families that had passed through the area over the decades. She used to say that finding Dorothy was one of the greatest joys of her long life. The bunker became not only a family reunion center, but a community symbol of hope and persistence. Young couples struggling with housing were directed to the project. Isolated elderly people found an adoptive family there. Children in the adoption process received emotional support from people who understood the experience of family separation. The story of Dorothy and Walter inspired books, documentaries, and similar projects in other cities. But for the people who knew Dorothy personally, she remained a living example that it's never too late to discover who you really are, and that family is something you can build at any stage of life. The last document found in the bunker was a letter Dorothy had written but never sent, addressed to the person who finds this place after me. If you are reading this, it means you found your way here for some important reason. Perhaps you are looking for family. Perhaps you are looking for answers. Perhaps you are just looking for a place where you can be completely yourself. This bunker taught me that home is always a work in progress. It is something you create every day through small choices of love, forgiveness, and persistence. It is something you can lose and find again. It is something that can be bigger than you ever imagined possible. My story began with a traumatic separation and continued with decades of unconscious searching. It ended with a reunion that expanded my definition of family to include not just blood, but choice. Not just the past, but the present and future. Whatever your story, I hope you find in this place the courage to keep searching for what you need. I hope you find people willing to walk with you. I hope you discover that you are worthy of love and belonging. And I hope that, when your search ends, you use what you've learned to help others find their way home. With love and blessings for your journey, Dorothy Mitchell Smith. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story about Dorothy and Harold, and how true love and perseverance can reunite families even after decades of separation. Do you believe fate guided Dorothy to that bunker? Leave your sincere words about this journey of rediscovery and reunion in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us for another moving story. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching narratives.